Hey, so I've been thinking about the problem of consciousness for a lot of years now. And I've really always wanted to discuss this with people or just put my ideas out there, but somehow I never did. Because in my mind, I just never really thought that I knew enough about this topic to say anything. But apparently, this is one of those topics which doesn't really have a structural foundation behind it. So, the most intelligent people in the entire world are looking for answers, trying to unveil the mysteries behind our thoughts, our mind, our perception, and consciousness overall. Everybody sort of have their own abstract ideas or theories based on, of course, really reasonable assumptions which have been tested and which have been explored, but there's nothing really concrete about what we understand consciousness to be. But I will start from the nature of creation itself, and I think it's quite apparent that I'm really fascinated about the idea of creation and destruction. Okay, but it is one of those things that is so complex, and it is so nuanced, and it has so many subtleties that you can't help but be amazed by how this fuckery even exists, right? So um, the reason I chose this headliner, the cataclysmic nature of creation or existence, is because our existence or our creation is cataclysmic in nature. It is of immense proportion. I'm sorry, it's of immense proportions or immense magnitude, so to speak. I think I touched upon it a little bit in one of my previous videos, how the universe was created, but I would explain it or revisit that idea a little bit. So, we do understand that the nature of creation is based on very extreme atmosphere or very extreme circumstances. So, things cannot really form unless there is really high temperature or high density when it comes to creation of a universe. So, we don't really know how that process happened because it was not apparent. We understand about the whole idea of quantum field and how things pop in and out of existence based on philosophical assumptions, not on evidence, because we can't find evidence for something that happened like billions of years ago, right? Anyway, what people theorize is somehow billions of years ago quantum field just erupted, like there were probably matter or particles or whatever, the building blocks of life just existing in that field. And I don't really remember the book or the author, but this is also one of our philosophical thought experiments, which said that everything, the building block or building particles already exist. They just pop in and out of existence, and they sort of like bond together whenever the circumstances are right. So in that atmosphere, it needed immense temperature or immense density or pressure in order to form. And I think that is also very beautifully related to how character is built in daily life, in our personality, because when we are living in very comfortable or very easy circumstances, it's very easy to just go with the flow, and you don't really change because you don't need to. You don't really have any motivation to change. Relationships get stale because everything is so damn okay. It's all right, it's fine, it's comfortable. So you don't change, you don't challenge yourself, and you don't challenge your partner. So that's also why I am kind of making a metaphor out of that creation thing. But when the universe cools down, the nuclei, the random or floating nuclei that exist in the early universe, had to get attracted to electrons, and electrons then start orbiting or revolving around the nuclei, and that's how atoms are formed. So the reason why I'm mentioning this again in my video now is because people sort of believe that consciousness is computational, and this is the entire premise behind our fear that artificial intelligence is one day going to just going to get sentient out of nowhere and out of no reason, and just going to emerge out of computational structures that we build. And I don't think personally that that's possible, because I don't believe, like Sir Roger Penrose, that consciousness is computational at all. I think consciousness is primarily biological. It's our biology that gives rise to or gives birth to consciousness, and computation is just a quality that emerges out of our biology and our biological reactions towards everything else or our natural environment. But I was thinking about this really interesting concept, that how do atoms know or how do particles know what to do, you know? So we're thinking about random nuclei and we're thinking about electrons, and we've only given them names out of our own imagination. Like, it's not like they're called or they really are electrons or nuclei inherently. We understand their purpose and that works for us, but that's not really entirely the truth of their existence. So when we don't even know where they come from, like, how can we claim any knowledge or any sort of ownership towards them, right? So what I'm saying is, if the particles understand inherently what they have to do or how an atom is formed, that is the greatest mystery, better than any mystery or crime or thriller novel or movie that I've ever watched or read. And that sort of brings me down towards this idea of cyclical nature of time. So recently I've been watching this show, this really amazing show called Dark, and it talks a lot about the idea of whatever happens before is dependent on what happens after, and what happens after is dependent on what happens before. It's called the bootstrap paradox, by the way, which says that anything or any occurrence is dependent upon whatever happened before, and whatever happened before is dependent on what happens after, which is like a mindfuck, but it's a very beautiful thought experiment. So according to that, if I applied that to a atom's formation or its creation out of nothing or out of basic building blocks or particles, if the atom knows how the story is going to end, that just makes logical sense that that information is going to help the particle formulate the actual atom, and vice versa. But since right now we don't really have enough length of a timeline to really assert that fact, we can't be sure. But I think that's a very beautiful idea to just ponder, that what if the atoms or what if the molecules know inherently everything that's going to happen later in the future, and that's how they get their information from, that's how they are entangled, that's how past, present and future are actually entangled. And that's, I think, how consciousness emerges, because time as we know is not real. It's a social construct. We've constructed or invented time in order to explain or in order to have some kind of a structure that we can follow. After that, I wanted to discuss creation versus evolution. That's also, I think, was a really interesting topic to talk about when it comes to consciousness. So, of course, we all know about the creation myths and legends, and a lot of people do believe that that's true, and I really respect that. People think that, God created everything, and I actually am one of those people somehow, because I didn't used to be, but now I am, because I was thinking about this computational thing and how evolution happens. So if we follow evolution or evolution's path, that says that everything evolves into a better functioning model or demo of itself based on its experiences with the natural environment. So that's how we evolved from fish to people. And I do not deny that. Okay, I'm not really a very fanatical creationist. I'm saying that evolution is absolutely true. However, there are things that evolution cannot really cannot explain in its entirety. So evolution can explain that we were fish and we were living we were living underwater, and that's why our eyes weren't really well adapted to sunlight or living, above the surface of water. So we didn't really have eyes as we know them to be now, which I think eyes are really beautiful, by the way. But anyhow, So something was created or transitioned from a very abstract thing to a concrete thing based on our need to survive or navigate in the physical universe where there was a lot of light. But what evolution does not explain is, it does explain how we transition from zero to whatever, but it doesn't really explain how the particles themselves know how to evolve. So we can understand how genes evolve, because genes contain all of the information from our ancestors and all of our history, and whatever we needed in the time, or however we survived, or whatever tools we used to survive. So that's how we evolve, based on whatever's happened in the past, in order to survive or thrive in the present time. However, how did the cells evolve, or how did the particles evolve from mere particles to atoms? They went from being isolated particles to becoming concrete, solid formulations of something that was, malleable, that was observable, or that could be changed. And that's how we've come upon um, nuclear reactions and how to control them. um, Anyway, I will talk about that a little bit later, but I also wanted to talk about consciousness in terms of yoga. So I've been practicing yoga for about, I think, 6 years now. And the basic concept of consciousness in yogic terms is pure awareness. So it doesn't have anything to do with thinking. It actually tries to get you out of your thinking or rational mind and get you connected more towards your inner self, or how we observe the universe, how we feel the universe, how we react to the universe. Um, Also, I was thinking about how awareness in its more natural form or pure form does not really consider what is good or bad in materialistic terms, but it is only concerned with how to interact with the natural environment around you in the most sustainable manner. So the reason behind meditation, or getting down to that base consciousness level, is that our rational minds or our psyches are not really attuned to our inner world um, in the present time. So we're living in capitalistic times where everything is very materialistic and are very objectivist, and we all have our dreams and aspirations and goals, and we're living in concrete jungles, and that somehow has a very negative impact on us. Even if we don't understand it, even if we deny it, it's not like it's going to go away just because we reject its existence. So what I mean is that if we don't really understand our own emotions, how our emotions are arising, the reasons behind those emotions, and the reasons why we take certain decisions or think certain thoughts, or get attracted to certain people or get repulsed by certain people, we can't really call ourselves aware or conscious beings. Because consciousness, in my opinion, at the most root level, is just being aware of all of these things that arise. So when we are practicing yoga is has also been unfortunately transformed into something that's sort of like an acrobatic thing that you do in order to show people that's really cool or hot or whatever, and it really is, but that's not the entire point of it. The point of doing yoga, or being, or coming down to that base consciousness, is to observe everything. So unless we are really attuned to our natural environment around us, we cannot make rational decisions which are better for our well-being. So we think that we know what's better for us, but we actually really don't. And I think consciousness can be accessed in its entire intensity in this manner, but it can also have its caveats. And at this point, I would like to quote Carl Jung, and he's a very big proponent of symbols, and being being in alignment with your dream world or your symbological world, and just understanding what your psyche is telling you, because our psyche is formed, as I mentioned, I think it's formed from our accumulated collective consciousness experiences throughout history and whatever happened before, so that we could use our ancestors' experiences in order to not make their mistakes again. So a lot of people don't really follow this line of thought. They don't really think that genes are controlling anything, but we, of course, in science do believe that nature versus nurture debate has a lot to do with evolution and our environment. So I think there's a lot of ground, a lot of really reliable ground that we can reference to. So our psyche is also not consciousness, by the way. It's just like a repository of useful information. So for instance, if you're building an artificial intelligence platform, you have to input like a lot of information, like really lot of information, in order for it to function properly, or in order to make it help make it good decisions, or the decisions that you want the artificial intelligence machine to make. So, in the same sense, I think our genes are like some sort of file systems or cabinets filled with very useful information from everyone or every human who lived before, so that our consciousness doesn't really have to struggle as much as they did, as our ancestors did. So, our ancestors had to struggle a lot to make good survival decisions, or good decisions that could make them or help them survive or thrive, actually. But since now we have all of that useful information, we don't really have to do trial and error sort of behavior in order to find out what's the right thing to do and what's the wrong thing to do. But we still do that because we are not attuned or aligned with our psyche or our consciousness. We don't really take our symbols or inner feelings or emotions very seriously, and if we do them in very childish and immature ways. So in when you study a little bit of psychoanalysis or psychotherapy, you find out that a lot of our emotions or symbols that we feel or see in our dreams are not really, they're not really pointing us towards what we should do. They are mere symptoms or indications of what we are fixated upon. So there's a term fixation that's very popular in psychotherapy or psychoanalysis, and that basically means is that a person can get stuck on an idea or a person or a feeling or a desire, and that makes them that creates a sort of neurosis or a complex in their brain. And that neurosis, unless that can be figured out or cured or healed, that person cannot make good emotionally healthy decisions basically for their life, and their relationships don't work, and they don't really know how to interact with the rest of the world and their environment, and they're always threatened by other people. So this is where I would like to mention this phenomena of why people get so envious and resentful, is because they are forever stuck in survival mode. And this is what capitalistic structures or socialist structures in their fanatic forms do to you. When you feel like everyone is a threat to you, or you're envious of everyone around you, that just generally means that you are in constant survival mode based on your primitive instincts or primitive thought patterns. And those patterns don't really help us in the time that we're living in right now. We're living in very different environments and very different sort of atmosphere that was not present in ancient times. So we also have to change our consciousness. We also have to be very mindful of whatever kind of symbols or whatever kind of emotions and desires that we follow. So when you talk about consciousness in terms of psyche or our mind, not our brains. So there's a difference between brain and mind, and I hope everybody does understand that. So the brain is the computational part of us, and our mind is the more natural or biological part of us. And I would also reference to this idea of how emotions are also chemical. And it's true. If you think about or read about our ancient hunter-gatherer societies, they used to follow animals based on a kind of feeling or a vibe or a sense of understanding that something was fearful or something was anxious or agitated, and then they could actually feel the vulnerability of the prey and hunt it down. And that goes the same way for the prey as well. So the prey can actually feel a predator's menacing or malicious presence. And you can also find this in a lot of interviews done with kids or grown-ups who've been unfortunately victims of sexual assault or any kind of violent assault, and they could always tell if they were stranded in an alley or in a street and somebody was charging towards them or walking towards them. They could actually sense a really bad feeling of foreboding or of evilness emanating from the other person. It has a lot to do with pheromones. Pheromones are chemicals. There are a lot of chemicals that release from our body when we are feeling a specific kind of emotion. So I would also say that consciousness also has to do a lot with these chemical emotions. And if we can feel those emotions in ourselves, if we are attuned to our body, that means we'll be able to regulate these emotions much better. And that means our consciousness would be at a stable level. So, this is why I believe that consciousness is primarily biological, that it's just naturally attuned to whatever is outside, whatever natural is outside, and reacts to that. But when we are in a concrete sort of environment, with everything is very businesslike, very formal, very professional, and very rationalistic, and nothing symbological or emotional actually goes into play, we can very easily make bad decisions or wrong decisions for ourselves because our senses have been cut off. Like, we're not attuned to each other. We're always misinterpreting each other's emotions or each other's thoughts or each other's intentions because of this disconnect, this physical disconnect. But since we are not living in ancient hunter-gatherer societies, we can now speak, you know. So consciousness in us, in humans, does not really have to be so damn abstract or so damn rationalistic at the same time. We can use both of our things. So I think if we use our rational brain more in terms of what really is good or bad for us, then we also become attuned to our emotions and how our body is reacting towards certain people, understand that, adapt ourselves, and really think about why we would be feeling these emotions about certain people of fear, anxiety, love, desire, depression, whatever. There's always a reason for that. And this can sort of point us out towards the right direction of where to find the idea or abstract, the overall overarching idea of consciousness, and understand where it stems from and how we express it. I'm also reading this really nice book called Consciousness Explained by Daniel Dennett, and there was also this book that I read in my college, which was Descartes' Meditations, some book by Descartes, and it's a very famous thought experiment where he said that I only know that I exist because I know that I'm thinking. What he basically meant was that if somebody was controlling my brain, they could control every single thing, but one thing they could not rationally or practically do was convince me that I was thinking. So I could not know that I was thinking unless I actually existed. So the problem that people are trying to solve with consciousness right now, in this era even, is that okay, we understand all of these biological processes, these chemical processes, how we react to our environment and everything. There's a stream of consciousness running where we are observing all of these thoughts, but who is the damn observer? And I would come to the conclusion that it's a result of a loop. And I think there's a really famous book called I Am a Strange Loop that I really want to read. I think that would give me a lot of better answers that I could extrapolate further. And it's by somebody called Hofstadter. And there was this really popular TV show called Westworld. And I think they really brilliantly discussed or researched or went or delved into this idea of how loops in our brain keep on happening, or we have loops of habit that keep on happening. Everything will repeat itself unless we break the loop, and we can't really break the loop unless our consciousness emerges. So our unless we make a different decision. So when we make a different decision and break our loop, that's a signifier of being a conscious human being. Because of course, if you don't really understand, if you don't even know that you're doing something wrong, or some habit that you're repeating over and over again is not really giving you the right answer or the right behavior, or leading you towards towards the right direction, then you're not really conscious or you're not really aware. Conscious literally means being aware of or knowing something. So if you don't even know what's wrong in your pattern, how can you ever solve it? So at the end, I would just like to end with this thought that it's really important to change our bad habits or bad thought patterns if they've consistently given us bad results over and over again. I know that I've been rambling a lot about all of this thing, but I think it's really important just like get into a habit of asking questions and being confused about things and being unsure about things and just like thinking out loud in front of the rest of the universe so that maybe other people can also be a little bit more courageous and think about the same things. So I hope I'll see you later with better research and more interesting things.